your host, Yvonne Wolf, and today our special guests are Janet and Gerry Souter. They are the writing team behind Telling Americans America, A Journey into a Troubled Nation. Welcome, Janet and Gerry.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So tell us about this book. This is a nonfiction book which
Correct.
you proposed to a publisher, and it's about post-war United States.
Well, we proposed this to a lot of publishers before we sold it, but it took a long time to write as well. Janet's pretty much the one that got the ball rolling.
Yeah, we were actually looking for a project back in around the end of 2015. And so we do have this book called Chronicles of American Life, 1910 to 1992. So I started thumbing through it. And I was kind of interested in post-war America. I didn't think there was enough books about it, didn't know enough about it. So I found 1947, and there was
Very
an
pivotal,
item
yeah.
that mentioned just briefly the Freedom Train that traveled all across the country carrying historic documents. I thought, wow, I never heard of that.
No.
Freedom Train? So we started looking it up and realized there were no books on it. There was a paper, and there were one or two small websites, but that was it. So we thought, let's look at this and see if this is book material. And the
And
more
nine-
we looked, the more we found.
Yeah, in 1947 is before that America became more prosperous, right? And how, yeah.
Right. Well, the problem was, and right after the war, America was in pretty much of a turmoil. We had a president that we didn't elect. He was Harry Truman came in after he was vice president for Franklin Roosevelt, who died in office,
Yes.
and Harry became president. So nobody knew him, and there was labor trouble. There were refugees from Europe piling into the United States, and people were worried about taking jobs and this sort of thing.
Right. Yes.
There was still rationing going on because the factories hadn't switched over to civilian work yet. So all of these things are causing people to be pretty uneasy, and there was a lot of flare-ups around the country, and communism was starting to sneak in the other side of the door too. So the work, because we now no longer had the USSR, Russia, as an ally. They were a antagonist to us. So the country was in deep trouble at that time. So this group of civilians got together, and they put together a train, called it the Freedom Train, and it was they got the railroads to cooperate. They built they had the 7-car train built by the railroads, and the diesel engine, and these 7 passenger cars, they gutted them out, made display areas inside them, and had documents from the National Archives and the Library of Congress and private collections, the actual documents like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Emancipation Proclamation, all of these different, 130 of these in this 7-car train. And so it had to be, it was bulletproof, it was armored, all the windows were steel plated over, and it was a traveling museum.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was guarded by 27 U.S. Marines who lived in the last 2 cars, and they stayed with it the whole time.
It went all over the United States.
Yeah, all 48 states. There were 48 states at the time.
On a traveling exhibit.
300 towns. And of course they had to coordinate the routes and so forth. So it was quite an undertaking.
That was
for
over
them.
52 different railroads they had to travel.
Wow.
And all the railroad tracks and everything were set for them to go through, but the government didn't have anything to do with it. This was a strictly civilian thing. But it did have the blessings of Harry Truman, the president, and also of Tom Clark, the Attorney General at the time.
Is it the Library of Congress that allowed these documents to be?
Yeah,
Well-
and
Right?
National
Who was it?
Archives. Right.
Nigeria?
The insurance cost was pretty silly, but these things were bulletproof. They were temperature controlled inside.
Wow.
Everything was in a lucite case, and the people would drive into it. The train would travel at night, come into the city or town. There were 300 of them during the day, early in the morning, And people would line up to come in, and the people lined up to come
Oh,
to the
thousands.
train.
I mean, they had averaged about 10,000 visitors a day in
day.
each town. So you can imagine they
Wow,
were
that's-
rushed through.
And they'd stay either a day if it was a small town, or if it's a city, 3 to 5 days to get as many people as they could to get in there and see them. And besides the train itself, there was a whole package that went with it that every town had to subscribe to. And that is, what did they call that
It was a
again?
rededication week. So prior to the train's visit, there were representatives from the American Heritage Foundation, which is no longer exists.
It
There
was
is an
created
American
just
Heritage,
for the
but it was
train.
created
Oh, I
just for the
see, I
train.
see.
So they had representatives that would come to the town, maybe about 3-4 weeks ahead of time. And they say, okay,
This is what we're
you're
going to
this is what we would
exhibit.
like you to do.
Yeah.
These are our suggestions. Here's the collateral material. They had a freedom, good citizens pledge, and they had brochures
And films
and
and
film
everything that they
and
had
songs.
Uh-huh.
And generally, they suggested a parade. Each day would be dedicated to a certain segment of society. It would be laborers,
Yeah.
women, education,
made. Fire
religion,
department,
Yeah, so
police department.
police,
So it's different
whatever
time of the
was
day, yeah.
appropriate.
Yeah, it was like a civics lesson for
Yes.
the town.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah.
And this was well, I can't imagine that being coordinated in our time and age.
That's what we
without,
thought,
right?
yeah.
That is
this is-
grassroots or
It was
This is
it's
before
amazing.
television, so
Yeah.
the only common messenger that they could send to all of these different towns in the states was a train, because every town had a train station
Yes,
or was near one,
yes.
and that was the perfect thing for them. So that's why they
Just-
chose the Freedom Train.
But-
But the people all bought into it. That was the really interesting thing about it in those days. They all thought, this is great, and they lobbied to get on the list of where the train would stop each time. So it was something that you look at the route of the train on a map, and it looks like spaghetti in a bowl. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, so
because
it
they
went
try to
back
do
and
it
forth,
according to
right.
weather,
Oh, of
to have the
course,
best
yeah.
weather in each location of the country.
So people can
And
come.
they did it. It started out in 1947 in September, and they finished up in January in 1949 with at Truman's
Inauguration.
inauguration.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal. It was kind of the rock star of its time. Bing Crosby, he recorded a song, "Make Way for the Freedom Train," and the Andrews sisters backed him up on it. And
They
these
had a
were
Freedom
big-
Train operetta.
How about Bob Hope? Was he part of this?
He wasn't part of this,
really, no.
he might have been, because almost everybody got a piece of it, because the movie stars and that would come to the train opening.
Yes.
They got pictures of Lana Turner and some of the actresses and stars.
Well, that time there was definitely that vaudeville circuit. And
Oh,
your
yeah.
actors
And radio
are
shows, too.
constantly,
Yeah,
right,
radio
on the
drama.
road, and they might have seen it. And
But every city and every town bought into the whole thing, and it was amazing. And the newspapers, that helped us, because to research this, how are we going to find out what was going on? Well, every town had another thing. They all had a newspaper,
yes.
and the newspapers played this up. And that was the thing that really got everybody involved in it. Was we were able to go to our library at Arlington Heights, and they have a big collection of newspapers online
Yes.
that you can go to. And if we knew that we already knew the day and date the train was going to be there,
Yes.
so we look up a week or two ahead of that, and we see them getting ready for the train to
The
arrive, and all
publicity
the
is all
stories,
part
and
of that, yeah.
who's going to do what, and then the day of the arrival, and the day
Parade
and
or-
that
yes.
and the departure. So
Public
we had all of that material to work from, and there was a lot of it. It was
This is incredible amount of research. You must have used the computer was the best way to do
Oh,
this,
yes.
right?
oh yeah, we had to.
Absolutely, yeah.
It took us 2 years of research and that, just putting this.
We did go
art
down
together.
to, we did find that Bloomington, Illinois
Yeah.
had an extensive box of material in their library. And mostly it was the letters that went back and forth from the Freedom Train staff to the
The coordination behind it.
city,
Yeah, exactly.
to coordinate it, the
A box.
collateral
So
material.
It wasn't online. This is
Well,
a
that was right. That
box.
was so that we could see. Okay, this is
Yeah.
what went on in
Yes.
terms of what they required.
Behind the stage.
And yeah, because of course also when the train arrived, they had to have people like, they had to have a medical tent for anybody who's, people might faint while if waiting in the heat. I mean, because you're talking thousands of people.
Yes.
They had to have security. They had to have the grandstands where the mayor would stand and cut the ribbon and so forth. So there were all kinds of things that
And
they
they
had
also
to
had to take care of the Marines, because at each
Yeah.
stop, the Marines had dry cleaning to take care of the
Yeah,
uniforms.
27 of them, right?
They also had to eat because they didn't have a diner on this train.
No,
they had
this-
snacks, and they had 3 porters kind of taking care of them, but they had to eat at the locations they would stop at while everybody's going through. They'd leave a group, 3 or 4 Marines to guard the actual train. Then the other ones would would have lunch and breakfast breaks and that. And so they had to be driven to restaurants and stuff, and usually the places comped the meals,
Yes,
so they ate for
yes.
free. But still, they had to have all of this being taken care of as they went from one place to the other. And they all were all tickled to death about that, because these Marines, all in their blues,
Right,
and they'd all just come back from the war too, so they had all their war medals and everything on their uniforms. So, and the Marines they picked from 2,000, they culled it down to 200, and from 200 down to 27.
So they must be
And
the.
it looked like central casting in a Hollywood movie.
I bet.
These guys were beautiful.
Yeah, yes, of course, right?
everybody
and they're all the
flocked
same
around
height,
them.
right?
almost, yeah.
Right. You can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. This was.
So, and then and then evening, by the time the evening rolled around at 10 o'clock, they finally had to stop it, and there were still people lined up, and people lined the tracks going into the town. They may not be able to get on the train, but a lot of them would go in and participate in all of this other stuff going on. And like I say, they lined the railroad tracks just to watch it go by.
And this sounds like the kind of story that should be in a PR education, right? That the best
Yeah,
example of
Yeah,
advertising.
the way
PR,
the
right?
country just joined together and,
Right, and the effects
got
of it.
behind it.
Yeah.
And so it was, it went for those 2 years. It was like I say, the rock star of that particular time, and
Yeah, and there were little stories that went along with it. For example, in a bunch of teenage girls were waiting in line. I think this was in Brooklyn, and nothing else to do. They're just standing there, and they said a Marine looked over, and the train had red, white, and blue stripes, and the white was in the center. Okay, he looked over and he thought, wait, there's only red and blue. The girls had been kissing it.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, like, can you imagine?
Yes.
Ooh.
Oh my.
They
Oh my.
did. They
a
thought it
1,000
was-
lip prints
Oh
across the
my
train,
gosh.
wiped out the white stripe
Yeah.
on the locomotive.
Yeah, from all the
They
miles.
even, one of the prisons in Washington State sent one of their inmates to visit the Freedom
visit,
Train. They
With
got
a
him a
guard.
suit. Yeah, with a guard. They got him a suit, got
Yeah.
him all dressed up and everything, and his job then was to write a report about it when he got back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the 1940s, yes.
And up in the Southwest, this woman went to see the train. She wanted to see, in the last 2 cars were iconic things too. And one of the iconic things they had in there was the flag that was carried up to the summit of Mount Suribachi, and on Iwo Jima. And that was a big deal at that
Yes,
time,
of
the
course.
5 guys
Yeah,
pushing the
so
flag. Well, her son was one of the people that got that flag up to the top of the mountain, and he didn't survive. And she got up there, just broke into tears, being able to see this flag. And boy, that was a newspaper story. That was really something to come across.
Yes. Wow, the nonfiction book for you to do the research, did it prepare you for your next book that was commissioned, right, by another publisher, the Ghost Army?
Well, actually, it's a little bit in reverse. We did the commission book first. That was on World War II.
I see.
And that was the Ghost Army conning the Third Reich.
Well, we were writing the Selling Americans during that time.
Yeah,
and
during
we
that
got
time.
So
yeah.
the war.
It took us so
yeah.
long to do the Selling American book that we did that book alongside at the same time. And then my novel, I started that, well, that goes back quite a ways. And That was to a different publisher, also in the UK.
Yes.
And so we work on some of these things simultaneously.
Yes. Oh, that's I
We
can't
have to.
imagine how. Yeah. How do you organize all that? That's
You should see our house.
Yeah.
No, she shouldn't.
I know.
Our two
Maybe
offices.
Maybe we'll, you
Yeah,
can
we don't
send us
we don't
a
show
picture.
anybody. that. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't share an office.
Excuse me. The Ghost Army is a nonfiction work too, but you were commissioned for that. Can you tell us
Correct.
how is it like to be commissioned for a book? I mean, most of our authors, it is their dream to be commissioned to write, right?
Well, it goes back. I'll tell.
You get this one.
Okay. Actually, the way we got commissioned for just about all our books, a few we've sent proposals on, but back in about 1997, Gerry had just started the business a couple of years ago, before that, and it was primarily going to be video production. Well, one of our clients also handled book production. He was a book producer, and he said, hey, could you guys do a book on the history of the American fire station? At the time, we said, yes, we'll take anything. So we said, yes, we can do it.
Yes.
And we did. We traveled out to the East Coast 2 or 3 times, photographed fire stations and did the stories on them and so forth. And then we thought, wow, we loved it. So we started sending out proposals to other publishers, let them know who we are and what we did and so forth. And gradually the contracts started coming in. We'd send them samples, and one thing kind of led to another. We also joined some writers groups, American Society of Journalists and Authors, that had a kind of a clearinghouse for people looking for authors to work on their books.
I see.
And so we got many contracts that way.
And one of the contracts that we got was to do a book on the founding of the United States for this publication, for this publisher in Carlton in the UK. And we did, I guess, ultimately about 6 books for them. One of the editors of that outfit started her own book
A series.
operation.
Yeah.
And she saw our names and saw what we'd done. And she gave us this particular book, The Ghost Army, because they thought this would be a nice addition to their backlist. Because look at all we'd done and everything. And we said, sure, we'll do it. Anything that came in the front door, yeah, we'll go for it.
Tell us a little bit about how commissioning work happens. Is that they pay you before?
Okay. The way they
they
worked it on this is the usual work is 3 payments. And they give you a payment to sign the contract. And then you get a payment when the manuscript is finished.
I see.
And then the 3rd payment when the manuscript becomes the book and is sold.
Ah.
And so those figure, and so you got all your money in your hand, and you don't have to worry about does the book sell or not.
Right.
Because
That's,
you've got the dollars, but we still sell that book because we like to go out and talk about it,
Of
and we
course,
put together
yeah.
talks,
You
and we have
enjoy
a
that,
talk on
yeah.
the Ghost Army that we go to.
We were at the Wooddale Library last year.
I see.
Yeah.
And then this year we'll be speaking about it at the Bartlett Library in August,
I
August
see,
31st, I think.
Right, and for
So-
military organizations and that sort of thing. So this kind of a book goes well for that. And it was a wonderful story about this top secret outfit that nobody knew about in World War II that fooled Hitler all the way from the Normandy invasion to crossing the Rhine River.
Wow.
And they say the whole thing about this is they took show business to World War II. They imitated corps and armies and fooled Hitler into thinking a whole army is over here.
Yes.
It's only 1,100 guys.
I see.
But they
I
fooled him and the units to thinking that was a whole division sitting there. Meanwhile, the division's over here.
Now I heard about this in California when they were trying to make sure that from aerial pictures that there were more soldiers in California than there
Yeah.
were.
Camouflage and then
camouflaging and
They used rubber tanks, rubber artillery.
Right. I heard about that, but
And
I
they
didn't
used
know it was already
fake
done.
radio broadcasting. They had huge speakers that they carried around on half tracks and would roll those up at night and play the sounds of armies moving through the woods on the other side of the
Yes.
bridge or the other side of the river, and the Germans were sure those guys were there.
Yes.
And
because
then
we're
when nobody attacked, but somebody's shooting
the
over
other
here
direction.
somewhere,
Yeah.
who are they? And they did it, and they fooled them all the way. They never got the idea what was going on. And our intelligence groups were so clever at that particular time that one of the people who was doing a fake radio broadcasts for the Germans thought he was a German. Juan Pujol was his name. And at the end of the war, he received a medal from the British for his work that he did for them. And he also received a medal from the Germans, the second-class Iron Cross,
Yeah, they never
for his
knew.
courage. And this was after the war was
he's a
over.
double.
Yeah. They still believed he
Still
worked for them.
believes he was a German spy.
Oh, that is a great
Yeah.
So
book to
we
read.
have these great stories.
So how does that work to change over to fiction? Because I hear that nonfiction writers stay nonfiction, and then fiction writers stay fiction. So Gerry, tell us about the.
I think that's more common than you think. I think there are
Well,
some, but
yeah, the whole thing is a story is a story, and a book is a story. So there's not much difference. It's a matter of how much you make up out of the story. Now, my book right now, my first novel, just came out
Thread
at the
of
same
Sand.
time these other two books, Ghost Army and Selling America, all were released in July. So we've been working like crazy promoting these three books.
Right.
yeah.
But so
You've been very
that's
productive.
interesting, but it does make for compartmentalizing your head when you're working. But I love fiction. I just finished the sequel to our Thread of Sand, and I just did load that book too. And
When you started writing A Thread of Sand, were you planning for a sequel, or did it just come after?
well, actually, the sequel came while I was writing the first one, because the first one was involved. Jan was in the travel business for a little while there, and she had arranged for us to go to Egypt. So we went to Egypt, and we had a wonderful time in
When
Egypt.
was this?
We rode through camels.
in the
and-
90s.
Okay, yes. I think it was probably
Yeah, oh no,
very
this is
different.
Yeah.
quite a while ago.
Yes.
But we rode camels out there,
Oh,
and we
that's
sailed
wonderful.
up the Nile in a felucca sailing boat. and everything.
Yes.
So we had all of that material. And then a little later, we went to Paris. And we had a marvelous time in Paris. So actually, the Thread of Sand is centered around the Egyptian material that I was able to glean from that.
Yeah.
And Paris is the sequel to it, where the same character is
journey,
now in
yes.
Paris. So then I'm able to move that plot along, and that's moving nicely and just finished up on it.
Well, you have a very long career in writing, and you started in Glenview, working in the media, right?
Well,
Or
I'd
for
been
you-
working. I started out as a freelance photographer, and then I got hired by a number of different outfits. And I worked in Chicago as a Tribune photographer, and worked for the poverty program shooting in Chicago.
I see.
And then eventually I got picked up by Motorola as a freelance. And they sent me to Africa, they sent me to Germany,
Wow.
England, all over the place doing stories for them. But
Motorola?
eventually, after a few years, I thought about 8 years with them, I thought, well, I've had about as much of this as I can deal with, the corporate structure. And so
Traveling
then
a
I came to
lot.
Glenview and went to work for Motivation Media over on Milwaukee Avenue. And I thought, now at last I can kind of stay home and relax a little bit. No, they sent me here. I'm doing it all over again. And so I'm moving with them as well. But I got into film and video then,
I see.
and telling stories, moving with moving cameras and stuff,
Yes.
and crews and things, and really enjoyed that. So eventually I got tired of taking crews through customs and lugging all that equipment all over the country and over half the world, and thought, no, I think a pad and a pencil would be a lot easier way to go on this. And my captions on a lot of the photographs had been getting larger.
Yes,
I'd
and
been-
they are.
And I've been doing
becoming to be
magazine
more-
articles
yes,
about some of the
they're becoming
places
more
I
a
went.
story behind the one picture.
Yeah, exactly. So I got started writing more and more, longer and longer, and pretty soon I
So
thought, hey,
naturally,
this is pretty good.
yeah, so it naturally took over that way.
So we just drifted into the writing part and then made it permanent with our group. Avril One Group is the name of our company.
Yes,
That means April 1st. We named it on April Fool's Day.
I see.
So we thought that would be a good name for the company. And that started us out on our little odyssey here.
I see. Well, so how do you promote 3 books at a time?
It's not easy. we do have a publicist,
I see.
Linda,
Yes,
and she handles the Freedom Train.
I see.
That's Linda
book.
O'Connor of O'Connor Communications.
Yes.
And but then there's also social media, and there's so many aspects of that. There's blog tours where your
you
book is
take care of
featured on.
That yourself?
I'm sorry.
do you
Yeah,
take-
that we try to do ourselves. I've learned a lot in the last year
Yes.
about that because, as I say, we were struggling to get the Freedom Train published for years before that. So once we got a publisher, then it was, I learned a lot in terms of what's available now, and
How to
I've got
do this,
friends
yeah.
that know about different areas. As I say, there's podcasts, there's blog tours, there's blogs, there's Twitter, there's
Facebook,
you know,
Instagram.
Yeah,
Yeah,
outfits that
Facebook
review
and-
your books and
Midwest Book Review,
Yeah.
and if you get your book
Chicago
reviewed
Writers
there.
Association, that's another outfit we belong to. So
Wow.
And then giving talks
You're
too.
well
Just
connected,
that's
yeah.
another way of making money on the book
Yes.
yeah,
itself.
PowerPoint
Definitely.
presentation to go with it,
Yeah.
and off you go.
Janet, what advice do you have for our writers?
What advice? I would say just keep writing, join a writer's group, read about how to write, but especially join a writer's group. The best writers groups give you honest but helpful criticism.
And
I
you
think
get this
that's-
criticism before you go into the real rough and tumble world of literary business, and you can get all your lumps early
Than
and not
later,
not
yeah.
have to worry about it.
Well, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you.
It's been a
We've
pleasure.
enjoyed
Thank you
it.
for having us.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.